All right. Hello. Today with us, Neil deGrasse Tyson. Um, he doesn't need any introduction, I know that, but I will just say a few sentences. So Neil deGrasse Tyson is an American astrophysicist, planetary scientist, author, and science communicator. Tyson studied at Harvard University, the University of Texas at Austin, and Columbia University. He was a postdoctoral research associate at Princeton University. Since 1996, he has been the director of the Hayden Planetarium at the Rose Center for Earth and Space in New York City. He was awarded the NASA Distinguished Public Service Medal in 2004. He hosted the television series Cosmos: A Spacetime Odyssey and Cosmos: Possible Worlds, successors to Carl Sagan's 1980 series. By the way, this is just among many things, just some stuff that I have selected. And the US National Academy of Sciences awarded Tyson the Public Welfare Medal in 2015 for his extraordinary role in exciting the public about the wonders of science. So, Dr. Tyson, thank you very much for being here and joining me today.
Well, thank you, and please just call me Neil. That's fine. You don't have to say doctor. That's so. It's like you're a doctor, therefore you should listen to him. No, if you're going to listen to me, it's because I said something that makes sense.
That makes sense. Okay.
That makes sense that I
All
said
right.
that should happen if it makes sense. Very good.
Okay, so today we will be talking about philosophy, mostly philosophy and its relation to science, that kind of topic. So I tweeted this, right? So I made an announcement on Twitter, and I said my next interview will be with Neil deGrasse Tyson. We will be talking about the relationship between science and philosophy. And then I said, so the question is, now that we have science, do we still need philosophy? Parenthesis, we have different answers. And then you said, you don't know in advance that we have different answers. So, yes, I didn't. I didn't actually, but why did I say that, right? Why did I say that? Because in the past, in 2014, there was a podcast you were a guest at, Nerdist podcast, and there were it was a long, conversation, but at some point, there was some conversation about philosophy. And you said something negative, right, about philosophy. And then there was a backlash. There was reactions. There were reactions from the philosophers, blog posts, things like that. And then, however, as a response to a blog article, you said, my comments and views on philosophy are best represented at this link. So you gave a link. That link was from a conversation with you and Richard Dawkins. Actually, it was The Poetry of Science, Richard Dawkins and Neil deGrasse Tyson. If the audience wants to see, they can find it there.
It's on YouTube, yes.
That's on YouTube, yeah. And you said your remarks in the video that video they were made in a more academic setting than your few sentences quipped in a comedic podcast. So I don't want to just look at that podcast and then say you said this, you said that. So I don't want to do that because you openly say that that wasn't an academic setting. That was just they were jokes mostly. Right? Okay. Now,
Well, so just to be clear,
yeah,
the Nerdist podcast, the host of the Nerdist podcast, in addition to his interest in pop culture, sci-fi, he is a professional stand-up comedian. And he goes to theaters and performs. And I happen to highly value comedy. And my comment came up when I said, I don't know your background. What did you major in? And he said, oh, he majored in philosophy first.
yeah,
He might have switched his major, but he started in philosophy. And all I said was, oh, that can mess you up.
yeah.
That's all I said. And apparently that clip got noticed by some philosopher somewhere. And then, like you said, they blogged about it. But that other conversation with Richard Dawkins held on a university campus predates that comment.
Yes, 2010.
Yeah, and that had, at the time, hundreds of thousands of views. It might have already been in millions. So here's this whole philosophy community jumping all over me on this one comedic quip when clearly none of them were among the hundreds of thousands who saw this other thing. So I was just disappointed that I would be criticized in an academic blog setting by people responding to one clip. This was just, as far as I was concerned, it was irresponsible academic reaction. They should have really said, is this how he really thinks? Let's look further. And they didn't. And it's not as though the original recording with Richard Dawkins was obscure. It's on his website. It was so I was just disappointed. That's all.
Okay, all right. We will talk about that too. That whole thing. It is 2 million views, by the way. The Richard Dawkins and
right now, yeah. Maybe at the time it was a little less. Yeah, maybe half a million. But sure, 2 million. There should have been philosophers among them, and apparently not, because they only referenced the comedic quip in a comedic podcast with a host who's a stand-up comedian. So.
I think Massimo Pigliucci had both of them in his blog for Huffington Post. Yeah, I think it was that. I think he also cited the Richard Dawkins discussion too. Yeah, but anyway, so today we will talk about that. So actually, let me just read a couple of sentences from that, your conversation with Richard Dawkins, and then I will ask you whether you would like to elaborate on that.
Oh, sure, definitely. No, I'll. It's not whether I want to elaborate. If you need or want elaboration, I will do so.
There are some parts. Yeah, there are some parts actually that would be nice.
Definitely, go ahead.
Okay, all right. So it is a little bit longer than this. I'm just reading the last bit of it. You say philosophy has basically parted ways from the frontier of the physical sciences when there was a day when they were one and the same. Isaac Newton was a natural philosopher. The word physicist didn't even exist in any important way back then. So, you say, I am disappointed because there is a lot of brain power there that might have otherwise contributed mightily, but today simply does not. It's not that there can't be other philosophical subjects. There is religious philosophy and ethical philosophy and political philosophy, plenty of stuff for the philosophers to do. But the frontier of the physical sciences does not appear to be among them.
That's a fine characterization, yes.
Okay, all right. So here's what I was thinking when I first I read this, then I watched the thing. So when I read this, so I thought, I never thought that philosophy was supposed to be in the frontier of physical sciences, right? So it's like, I didn't expect from philosophy to do something like that. Also, another thing is, from what you say here, if I understand correctly, and you can, of course, clarify this, this kind of suggests that the brain power invested in other areas than physical sciences is wasted. That's how I understand this. Maybe I misinterpreted you.
No. I don't know what about that would leave that impression. That was not my intent at all.
Okay.
What I'm saying is, we can ask each other why. We first have to agree that it's true before we analyze why it's true. But we can ask each other, why do we find fewer formally trained philosophers participating in the moving frontier of the physical sciences than we do in other fields?
Yeah.
And neuroscience, there are philosophers all in and out of that field. And from our offline conversation, I learned that you care about the philosophy of mind. And so that's all, for me, part of the same community of efforts to understand how the brain works and the mind within the brain. No, I mean, philosophy has great value. And I understand you had Peter Singer on, a very influential philosopher in many ways, where the whole country and the worlds have responded to things you've said. Some supportive, some fighting it. But the role of a philosopher is to challenge how people think about the world and see the world. And so that's all going quite well in these other fields. Now, in terms of a philosopher with us on the frontier, that's maybe I misunderstand what good philosophy is when it's attached to science. Because my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is you have, when it's at its best, you have scientists scratching their head, looking at data, and there's a philosopher right next to them. And they're saying, have you thought about it this way? All right? Here's a perspective that maybe you haven't considered, because maybe you're too mired in the data. You don't have a view that allows you to see what the next question should be as you proceed. And then you would move together through the bushes, through the brush and bramble of the unknown frontier. So that's how philosophy used to be in the physical sciences going back into previous centuries. And I think I have an understanding of why we've parted ways, and I'd be delighted to share it with you if you're curious.
Sure.
But that further clarifies my comments there.
All right.
And by the way, I'm milder than Richard Feynman and a few others who just said philosophy's dead. It's like they're people
Hawking,
who
right?
are just up in your face about this. You have that expression in Turkey, in your face. People who are arguing,
Yeah. We don't have that expression, but we know that we know what it is. But we don't. Have
you could figure out. It's
yeah.
common in the United States. Yeah. I was up in your face with someone who's angry and arguing with energy. So, if you look at the late Steven Weinberg, died only just recently, and Richard Feynman and Stephen Hawking, their comments on philosophy are way stronger and more severe than anything I ever uttered.
Yeah.
But I think I was an easy target because I was very visible and I have active social media, and so I don't mind that. That just comes with the territory.
No, and okay, all right, and we are clarifying it right now. Okay, that's okay. Now really maybe we don't have different answers to the question.
Well, I told you.
Yeah.
Because I'm not here trying to put a strong opinion.
Yeah.
You have to have my opinion. It's not about opinions. It's just about what is going on, and do we both understand what's going on out there? And we can interpret it and come up with what we think might be the causes and effects, and maybe that's where we would disagree. But I don't know that there's a point of disagreement about the absence of philosophers in the moving frontier of the physical sciences.
Yeah, so I think where we disagree about might be that is that something that the philosophers are supposed to be doing or not, right? So yes, there aren't many philosophers. There's interdisciplinary work, and I value it a lot, actually. A couple of years ago, we had a conference about imagination at Bilkent University, philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience.
Yeah, there it is.
Together, yeah, and we talk about mental imagery and imagination, both the neuroscientific part and conceptual part, more philosophical part. So I really agree with you in the interdisciplinary work, the value of interdisciplinary work. But should that be with the frontier of the physical sciences, right? So if a philosopher is not contributing to the frontier of the physical sciences, does that mean that that philosopher is not producing something valuable? Because that's what I understand. Again, as I say, that was my interpretation.
Yeah. So in your accurate quote of me on stage with Richard Dawkins, that was at Howard University, by the way, in Washington, D.C., several years ago. The poetry of science, like as you announced it. When I listed other branches of philosophy, forgive me, I don't think I mentioned neuroscience, but I could have at the time. Everything's just on the cuff. But I listed those as completely fine, noble places to apply philosophical inquiry. What I was saying, I think I see where your concern is. When I said there's a lot of brain power out there among philosophers. Philosophers are smart people, all right, and a lot of brain power, and none of it is in the. I would say none, but we are not sharing in that brain power in our physical sciences frontier, and so I was disappointed that was no longer the case. And if I didn't communicate that sentiment, I apologize, but that was in my head at the time I spoke. And if you give the link of that, and by the way, it happens at the end in the Q&A, right?
Yeah.
In that it goes on for 90 minutes maybe, and in the end, some people came up.
Yeah.
And it arose, just to put my quote in context, it might have been the chairman or certainly a member of that university's philosophy department asked the question. The philosophy departments are losing their funding across the country, and some are because the university is judging that if you major in philosophy, you can't get a job. Okay, it's not some easy, straightforward line between your degree and being able to pay your rent at the end. And so if they're judging how useful a university education can be for you, philosophy ends up dropping lower than nursing, for example, or business or marketing. Okay, so then Richard Dawkins commented, and I thought this was perceptive, and this leads into what I will otherwise say. He said, evolution by natural selection could have been thought up by a philosopher.
Yeah, I remember.
That's a very armchair idea to come up with. And there's no shortage of philosophers in the middle of the 19th century, but none of them did. It was the biologist who was this close to thinking about nature and animals and variation and sexual selection and all of this in his entire life. He studied life forms. And so this new idea came out of him. And so Richard Dawkins, that was his first example, and then I picked up the ball, and then I moved it into the physical sciences in the 20th century and beyond. So I think what it comes down to, and maybe I'm jumping ahead of when you would ask this question, I think what it comes down to is, if I stereotype the philosopher as the deep thinker in the armchair, okay, you can ask, what is the deep thinker in the armchair's access to what's happening on the frontier? And if that frontier does not derive from rational thought sitting in a chair, then you can't be all that useful. And I claim that when physics and astrophysics entered the 20th century, oh my gosh, no longer did anything flow out of anybody's rational thinking. We had quantum physics. Who ordered that? Particles popping in and out of existence. You're not coming up with that from an armchair. Somebody in a lab is experimenting with this, and they're making those discoveries, and they're seeing this, and they've got to scratch their head and figure it out. And then, so it's not only quantum physics, relativity, expanding universe. So I'm claiming that philosophers trained in the 20th century, if what you're doing is thinking and you don't have a laboratory, then there's a gap that opened up that you cannot cross just by thinking about it. You have to go into the laboratory. And by the time you've done all of that, you've become a scientist. And by the way, I want to add that all of us doing science on the frontier, just behind the frontier, all of us like to think that we also philosophize about what we're doing. Okay, whether or not it's from formal training or whatever, we all read philosophy books, but we don't have degrees in philosophy. But we're thinking, all right, if this is what's happening with the expanding universe, could there be a multiverse? Could there be? And so we're doing that. The difference is our formal training is not with degrees in philosophy. We learn about all the great thinkers of the past, and you learn about logic, and you learn about all of the formalizations that distinguishes philosophy from other branches of academic study. That is not helpful when there's something completely brand new that nobody ordered in the universe. And so when I say no one ordered, I mean, no one saw it coming. So I'm guessing, my hypothesis is that when the physical sciences, that's chemistry and physics, basically, when they started needing quantum physics and relativity and particle physics and all these things that you will never see from your armchair, when that became necessary to think creatively about the next questions and the next discoveries, then we parted ways with the philosophers. Yet all the rest of the philosophical fields are very important, have always been important, and will continue to be important, especially political philosophy. Oh my gosh, if there's ever a time we need a little bit of more of that, it's now in this world. Okay? And philosophy of ethics. Oh my gosh, We're about to crack the human genome. Are you going to have designer babies? You're going to choose, I need some philosophers in the room, please, to help
Artificial
me pose
intelligence,
the
for example.
questions about the consequences of these decisions. So yeah, that's where I am on this.
Yeah, actually, I was going to say that, but you already said that. So
Okay, sorry.
these things that pop up now, right? So, for example, the genome project and all that. Artificial intelligence, for example, there is a lot to think
Yes,
about artificial intelligence.
yes,
Ethical,
AI. I
legal.
forgot that. Thank you. AI. Put that in the bucket. Yes.
Yeah. So ideologies, we can see ideologies as a product of philosophy in general. Worldviews, things like that.
Yes. And I'd like to add something that's not always appreciated. You especially need and want philosophers when a field is brand new, where everyone is just kind of reaching. We're all sort of blind, right? Because you can't know what is the first question, the first steps to take. And so I was encouraged to see how many philosophers are participating in what is essentially the brand new field of neuroscience. It's a new field, and it's as open as anything out there, and philosophers are helping to guide the questions, especially with regard to things like our conscience, these mysterious things that everyone writes books about, and they keep writing books about it, which is evidence not that we know about it, but that we know very little about it. We're not still writing books on Newton's gravity or Einstein's gravity because we're there. It's done. It's 4 books on the bookshelf. But you look for in the human mind and consciousness, books are coming out all the time, and so that just says we're still poking in the dark, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, and also I was thinking the biggest achievement maybe in the contemporary philosophy of mind, the biggest achievement would be something like figuring out a way of empirically testing whether a system is conscious or not, right? So turning it into an empirical question would be a success in philosophy's part, but then it will become a science.
Yes, exactly, and that's the birth. The birth, you help give birth to new questions in the field. I love that.
Yeah. So the frontier, when you talk about frontier, I also think the emergence, the burgeoning of new disciplines, also, frontier of philosophy maybe, right? Just giving birth to new empirical areas. So in my mind, that's kind of a progress.
So that's interesting. Maybe Peter Singer birthed a new discipline when he started thinking about animal consciousness and sentience, I guess is the better word there. And should we be slaughtering them for our food if we have other options? And I don't know that people were thought about it much in that way before then. And now, we live in the world like, of course, we've always thought that way, but we actually haven't.
Yeah, right? It became mainstream.
It had a birth date. And so, and you're right, if you help me pose a question, and now I open up a field that is then empirically verifiable. You did your work. All right. Now I go to the lab and I perform the experiments, and you go on to the next question.
I would be so happy if someone can come up with a technique to, for example, figure out just looking at an event, for example, or an action, and then you test it. So you observe it, and then you can measure how morally wrong it is. Right. So, for example,
morality metrics.
Sounds better, right? You need to do some philosophical work there, because how can you be sure that it is really testing what it is supposed to be testing? So then you need to do some conceptual work there. You need to,
and that would apply if you can do that. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'll wait. That's your job. That's your assignment after this. Think about that.
Thanks for that. No pressure.
I think it was the scientist philosopher Logan Clendenning, and I won't get the quote exact, but I'll get it very close. He said something like, "No science achieves maturity without a system of measurement."
Yeah.
And think about that when, if we just for the sake of this conversation date psychology to like Freud and maybe a little earlier. So psychology is a relatively young field compared with chemistry and physics and biology and all the like. And so at the beginning, there he was, the interpretation of dreams, and he's trying to pry open a doorway into our minds, but he's got no metrics, right? There's no way. And so psychology has been trying to, all right, so that's clinical psychology. All right, experimental psychology, they've got metrics. And
behaviorism,
did the bird peck at the door? Did the did the humans? So it's clear. We see evidence of the need and value for measurements, and if you can find a way to measure morality, that would be very cool. One way you could do it possibly is have some quiz, and you give it as widespread as you can from one country to the next, from one culture to the next, because different religions will have different moralities. So you do this, see if there's anything in common, and then you could measure it against people's values, and it wouldn't be an absolute measurement, but you would get some sense of how the world would react to a decision that you make. That would be a start. But to believe that there's an absolute measure of morality, that would be hard, because the morality is something that has clearly evolved over time. It used to be, it's the moral thing. If people with dark skin, if you're not fully human, then of course we can enslave you. It's not an abomination to God or anybody else, of course. And that's considered just fine. All right. And so I do enough reading of history of how people thought and felt that I think that may be one of the most important things you guys need to come up with.
But when you said morality evolved, so I might say people's moral judgments evolved, right? But then a moral objectivist might say it was always wrong, right? Racism was always wrong.
So you can say that after the fact, but would you have said that if you were born and raised in the American South?
No, I wouldn't. Even though I wouldn't say it, it might have been still true, right? So that's the objective morality. So it's like
okay, all right. See, now you're getting all philosophical on me. You're saying
I know.
That's dangling there that no one even sees. Okay,
yeah, exactly.
Until someone sees it, and then you go back and say that was true even when no one saw it.
Yeah.
And I don't know how practical that is, but no one ever accused philosophers of being practical.
Yeah, I am practical in theory, but
I can pull quantum physics on you and say if no one saw it, did it exist? How about that? Now you take that one back to your armchair.
Yeah, but I wouldn't agree with that, by the way.
And by the way, in the Bible, there is no in the Jewish Bible, the Christian Bible. I know less of the Quran, but some of it. There is no indictment of holding human beings as slaves.
Yeah.
Right. It shows up all throughout, and it's so you think that if this truth is an eternal truth, whether people see it or not, you'd think maybe a little bit of that would have shown up, and in the Bible, and we're using sort of rational understandings of what it is to be human and all the rest to say no, you can't own another human being. No, and we can say that, but I think if no one sees it, like the tree in the forest, if no one sees it, I don't know what power you have to declare that it was something that was always there just because you found it later. I think finding it later means we have evolved to think differently from anybody before. And what may be true is, how alert are you to other dangling truths that none of us see, that in 100 years we'll say, look at them back in the year 2021. Those idiots, couldn't they have seen that it is morally wrong to own a pet dog? That is morally wrong to dine upon the reproductive organs of plants. There are people who are eating flowers and nuts and berries, and it's like maybe that in the future will be a morally wrong thing, an abomination to the plant to the plant kingdom. I don't know, but you're not saying that now, and so 100 years from now, don't come to me say, that was probably always true. If you don't see it and nobody knows it, it's of no consequence to anybody to make that sentence.
So I personally agree, I think, kind of. I cannot make sense of objective morality, independent of our judgments, actually. So for example, there are physical laws, right? If we see an electron going faster than the speed of light, we would say, well, we were wrong about this. There's no physical law like that, right? So if it is going faster than the speed of light, then we would say, okay, we were wrong. There's no, when a law of physics is violated, that means there is no law like that, right?
No, that's okay. That slightly misrepresents what goes on in physics, if I may.
Sure.
Okay.
Please.
So you perform tests, and you get the repeatability of some phenomenon in all the tests that you performed. So, for example, conservation of linear and angular momentum. That's a big one right there. There's the movement of heat energy and this sort of thing. So we have laws related, and we used to call them laws. We don't really use the term law anymore, which I'm happy to chat with you about briefly.
Sure.
But so you come up with a law of physics, and then one day you find that law broken. In every case, if that was declared a law because it was in every experiment we conducted, the law gets, quote, broken because someone went outside of the sphere of tests that were performed. And that's a frontier that you push. And you say, oh my gosh, so it used to be the law of conservation of mass. In every experiment we had done, we saw nothing broken. Then we say, oh, wait a minute. There's a deeper understanding. It's not that the law of conservation of mass is wrong. In fact, we still invoke it in certain experiments, okay? It's that if you're going to now have particle physics and higher energies, and we have E equals mc squared, we learn that mass and energy are combined. So it's not the law of conservation of mass, it's the law of conservation of mass and energy. So you don't discard what was previously experimentally demonstrated to be correct. It becomes the centerpiece of a bigger understanding. This is how we went from Newton to Einstein. Newton isn't wrong in every place Newton's laws. We went to the moon using only Newton's laws. All right. So the issue here is Einstein's understanding that he gave to us of motion and gravity. So special theory of relativity and general theory of relativity, motion and gravity, are that embeds Newton's laws. It encapsulates them. And you know this is true because if you put low speeds and low gravity into the Einstein equations, they become Newton's equations. So that's why I'm not going to say, oh, Newton's wrong and Einstein is right. That mischaracterizes what's actually going on here. So if you find an electron that's moving faster than the speed of light, that's going to be a situation, oh my gosh, that we have never tested before. And that'll take us to a new understanding of the universe where everything else still works in the regime in which it was tested, but that new understanding will now embed it and say, under this situation, okay, where you do the twist, and you pokey, and then the electron moves faster than light. And then all of a sudden, you have a deeper theory. You don't discard what came before. And so that's a nuance to what you were saying that I didn't want to go by uncommented on.
Okay, all right. So
and by the way, you can send an electron faster than the speed of light in a medium. All right. Yeah. So that's fun. It's called Cherenkov radiation.
In vacuum. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we have, what I'm saying is, by observation, we can actually see whether what we said was true or false, right? So we can revise it through observation. But when we are talking about objective morality, what we are talking about is the ideal. So, for example, when I say people shouldn't be killing each other, if I look at the world and I see that people are killing each other, that doesn't refute what I just said, right? It doesn't tell me anything about what I just said. Because what I'm saying is, ideally, in an ideal world, people wouldn't be killing each other. So then I cannot see how observation can help with the claims about objective morality. So that is why I'm not very, intellectually speaking, I'm not very fond of objective morality. However, there are some philosophers who say, for example, Kant, right? According to him, immorality is a kind of irrationality. And irrational is always irrational, right? Invalid argument.
By definition, yes.
Yeah. So, or utilitarians like Peter Singer, for example, say pain is in itself bad, whether people recognize the pain of other people or not in the history. Pain is it in itself, it was bad. So our judgments about it evolved, but the fact that pain is morally bad and we have a moral responsibility not to inflict pain on other people, that was always the case. How do we know that? Not because of our culture, but because of a fact about pain, or because of our principles are inconsistent if we do something immoral according to
Yeah, well, however, I'm concerned, and maybe the more nuanced argument that you could give in defense of that would obviate what I'm saying. But this reminds me of a conversation I had with the founder of Peta, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, the co-founder of Peta. I had a conversation with her on my podcast, Star Talk radio podcast. That's my commercial for it. Star Talk, at a podcast near you. So people characterize Peta as never harming animals, but her principles are slightly different from that, as I came to learn them. Yeah. She doesn't want to inflict pain, okay? Has a very sincere concern for how animals, how they're kept, how they're treated, and the like. So then I said to her, let me confess, I enjoy eating lobster, okay? And you take a live lobster and you put it head first into boiling water. And now, for me, this is just a side thing. Before I do that, I cut the rubber band that's holding their claws together so that it has one last chance to bite me before I put it in the water, just to give it a fighting chance. That's my own little way that I've rationalized it. But I mentioned this to her, and she said she's working with biologists for something that could be sold alongside the live lobster at the seafood store that will anesthetize the lobster before you put it in the water, thereby having it feel no pain at all. Okay. And so I thought that was interesting, that this was her response to me when I said this. And so for you to say, if pain is bad, you don't want to inflict pain, then if I want to slaughter an entire community of people, let me put them in some dome, put in an anesthetizing gas, and now they don't feel anything. Now I can kill them, and they had no pain at all. Yeah. So this notion, what you don't really mean pain, you mean harm, really. Yeah. Because you can imagine a military situation where. Here's another one, right? This, which I've never understood, and someone has to explain this to me one day. We've outlawed chemical, the Geneva Conventions and other rules of military engagement have outlawed chemical warfare, okay? Something that was used in the First World War, mustard gas, and okay, that's been outlawed. And I say, why? Oh, because it's inhumane. All right, then why don't you outlaw the missile that I just sent into the... I mean, all of these are means of killing the person who you want to kill, and you're going to say, well, bombs are okay, bullets are okay, all right? This weapon that cuts your head off, that's okay. Oh, but not the chemistry, all right? So I've never understood that distinction. Yeah. Because if you really shouldn't be killing people, then don't be telling me which ways of killing people are better than others. Yeah. That means none of them are good, whether or not they feel pain. Yeah. That's me I'm just spilling out.
Yeah. So you gave some arguments against utilitarianism, actually. And
I didn't do that knowingly.
So for example, one idea is from Thomas Nagel. So for example, if someone harms you, right, or hurts you, right, you would say that what they are doing is wrong, right? Because and then I can ask, right? So for example, if something is happening to me, someone is harming me or hurting me, and then I say it is wrong, they shouldn't be doing that. Why are they doing it? So why is it wrong, right? Why I think that they shouldn't be doing this to me? Is it because I am wearing glasses? Is it because I am male? Is it because I am whatever, right? No.
Was it because you harmed them yesterday? and they're coming back to harm
so
you.
in this thought experiment, I didn't do anything actually. So they are
You didn't say that. You didn't say. So in this thought experiment, you're just completely innocent, and the person that comes and punch you in the nose,
yes,
you didn't deserve it. Okay, fine.
Yes. Those are the parameters of this thought experiment.
Or
and
at least
then I
you
would
don't
say,
know that you did any harm to them. We live in a world
just
of
for
privilege.
fun,
Well, no, we live in a world of privilege where there are people who are doing harm just by their birthright, and they're not thinking about it that way, and they just don't even know. And so that's the sort of the ignorance factor that's got to be in your equation somewhere. But go on.
This person is just punching me because he doesn't like my face. That's it.
Okay,
That's
good. Okay,
Yeah,
now we're clear on what the motive is.
So just because of that. And then you ask me, why is it wrong, right? Why are you saying that he shouldn't be doing that? And then I say, because it hurts. Now, Nagel says, now what you are doing is you say then hurting is wrong. So that's the principle.
Got
right?
it.
And it is not about you, because there's nothing specific about me I mentioned in that justification of my belief that it is wrong.
But you're trying to invent a principle surrounding this moment.
Yeah.
Yes.
Then if I go ahead and hurt other people and I don't care about their pain, I would be inconsistent in myself, right? So then it would be irrational. So here's an argument, for example, right? And that doesn't have to be pain. That can be other things too, right? That you don't want other people. So this is more like a rationalization or a rational argument to support something like a golden rule, right? Something like that. Okay. There were some. Okay, we don't have much time actually.
By the way, you got to admit the golden rule is pretty good. You got to admit that.
Yeah, the kind of a rule of thumb, but still.
Yeah, but I mean, it's. I think it's shown the test of time in important ways.
I agree. But you shouldn't take it too narrowly, though, right? So for example, if you are a person who really street fights, you want to fight with people, so then you just start fights, and then you say, I would be really happy if other people would start fights with me.
Okay. Okay, I understand. Yes.
Right.
Okay.
So it should be.
That's a loophole that I hadn't considered in the golden rule.
Yeah.
I want to harm you, and so therefore come back and harm me, and that's how I want the world to be. Right.
Yeah. I'm a fighter. Just fight.
Do unto others.
So then you would start fights. Yeah. All right. So there were other things that I wanted to ask you about So, for example, one thing. Well, there are some things I want to ask you about your comments about philosophy in the past, but also I actually want to talk about the simulation hypothesis, and I know that you are interested in that, right? So
I think about it. I mean, I like everybody else, it's very fun to think about, and I don't know if my thoughts are deeper or more nuanced than others. I don't claim to be at the frontier of that dialogue, but I do have thoughts on it. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So then let's quickly just go over the stuff from the Nerdist podcast. The reason why I want to do it is because it's still in the internet, and if you search Neil deGrasse Tyson philosophy, you see the criticisms of that podcast, right? So then let's clarify that first quickly, and then let's talk about the simulation hypothesis, because I also find it interesting. So in that podcast, you said, so one of the podcast presenters said that he majored in philosophy, and then you said that, what did you say? That can really mess you up.
Yeah, right? That's what I said.
Okay. So what do you mean by that?
What I mean by that, it's what I found is actually a more fleshed out version of that is, if you only dabble in philosophy, it can mess you up. Because whereas if you do a more formal training in it, then the loose ends that might be dangling there get tidied up in the full course of study. But so I think he didn't fully get a degree in philosophy. I have to check the tapes on that. So what happens is, if you know just enough to think you're having deep thoughts, but not enough to know that they're not really deep thoughts, then you're left in a state of contemplation that can leave you with there's a term that came up a few years ago, in analysis paralysis, where you're saying, well, should this happen? Should it be? What is the meaning of meaning? And what is meaning? And then what is the meaning of meaning? And what is it else that's happening? Is H2O water, right? That's been a big thing in some circles of philosophy. You can end up sort of getting lost from the point of view of a scientist, getting lost in thought, and then maybe never come back to sort of reality. So my quip related to what happens when you just take a little bit of philosophy and you just get lost in thought. And wait, we still have to eat. We still have to, get on the bus and go to school or whatever. So that's what I meant by that. But it was done comedically.
Okay. All right. So it is, I kind of agree, I think, because if you just, philosophy is the love of wisdom, right? So the etymology is the love of friendship or love of wisdom. It might not be wise to be obsessed with some philosophical questions, actually. So then if a person is it pursues wisdom, then it wouldn't be a good idea to do that. I did that once, actually. So I was having some problems with the meaning of life and things like that. So I was trying to figure that out. And then
there's therapy for that, by the way. You can
it can be. But I had questions. So I don't think. My problem was philosophical. I think it still is. But anyway, so
so you partly agree with what I said.
Yeah.
I'll give another example. It's a common sort of philosophical rebuttal. Not a rebuttal, a commentary on science is that you can't you can't prove a negative, just as an example. And I don't agree with that. I mean, it's true in a perfectly logical sense, but in a practical sense, we prove negatives all the time. And I don't want to use the word proof because that proof has a specific meaning, but we can demonstrate negative information and we do it all the time. Okay, so an example I give of this is you wonder if there's a bear in a cave. All right, because you want to go in the cave, all right, and maybe you want to live there because it's still caveman days, right? So, but a bear's going to eat you if it's in the cave. So, you're clever and you take a particular kind of dust and you dust it around the cave door, and then you watch to see if any footprints go into the dust, and you wait for days and weeks and even months, okay, and you say there's no footprint activity. All right, and bears like to eat with some frequency, and it's not winter, so they're not hibernating. So I've performed an experiment that gives me very high confidence that there's no bear in the cave. Okay, without even going in the cave. And to a scientist, we are completely happy with that experiment. The philosopher will say, but you can never know. There could be a kind of bear that floats, or that you'll come up with stuff. And I'm saying, I don't care. All right, your discoveries will be delayed because you will have analysis paralysis. And I have my own statistical sense of what would happen in the parameters of the experiment to give me confidence to go in there and not confront the bear. That is demonstrating a negative, that the bear does not exist in a way that would satisfy essentially any scientist that's out there.
And so. Yes, the scientists would just look at the evidence or the lack of evidence, right? That we would expect to see if there were.
There are occasions where the absence of evidence does indeed serve as evidence of absence.
But I think if a philosopher then says, "How do you know that there is no invisible bear that floats?" Right, something like that. I think that is just plain bad philosophy. Right?
Okay. I made that. It's bad philosophy because I just made it up on the spot. That's why that's bad philosophy. No, here's a better philosophy. You ready? Better philosophy. That cave has another exit that I hadn't considered, and the bear's going in and out of that other exit. And in my model of what's going on, I have not considered that. And so I go in and I get eaten by the bear.
But isn't that an empirical, claim that we can just check and things like that? So let me give you what I understand. So here's an example of a philosophical question that I understand, right? And so how about this? This light from sun, it takes 8 minutes, right? From the sun to Earth.
Through space, it takes much longer to get from the center of the sun to the surface. It takes like hundreds of thousands of years for light to bounce off of all the atoms and the particles in the sun to get to the surface, and then it's 8 minutes and 20 seconds.
When it leaves the sun, then it takes 8 minutes.
8 minutes and 20 seconds, yeah.
8 minutes, 20 seconds. Okay, all right. So,
by the way, I didn't say 820 to be nitpicky. I said 820 because if you add up those seconds, it's 1,000 seconds, so it comes out even.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, 1,000.
So 1,000.
No, 500 seconds. It's 500 even seconds.
500 seconds. Okay. Now, and if there is a solar flare right now in the sun, right? There is a big solar flare, let's say, happening right now in the sun. There is no way that I can know this.
Correct. There's no way.
No way.
Unless you develop a wormhole or something.
Yeah.
But right now, a wormhole, you could know it before the light reached us. But ignoring that for the moment, there's no way you can know.
Under normal conditions, there are no wormholes or anything.
Yes, okay. Yes, there's no way in any of our understanding of how this universe works where you will learn of that flare.
Because there cannot be any...
Sooner than 8 minutes and 20 seconds later. Correct.
Okay. All right. However, when I say that...
But there's no however to that. That's just how the universe works.
No, that's fine. That's fine. This, however, is a different kind of however. So that is settled. That part is settled.
Yes, it's settled science. Yes.
Okay. All right. However, a different kind of however. When I say there is a solar flare in sun right now, I cannot know that. But it is either true or false. Let's say for the sake of argument, even though we will never know until we wait for 8 minutes and 20 seconds, it is right now, let's say, true that there is a solar flare in the sun. Question is this. What I am saying right now is true, even though I don't know that it is true. It is true, right? There is a solar flare in the sun. What makes it true, though? It is not a logical truth. What makes it true? The fact that the solar flare on the sun makes my sentence true. My question is, how? So I say my sentence is true because, even though I don't know, right? Let's assume my sentence is true because there is a sun flare on the sun, but there is no interaction. How did it make this true? You see the problem there?
All right. So, yeah, it's a problem to a philosopher. It's not a problem to the scientist, right? We are not spending time posing those questions to each other as scientists.
Yeah.
Because it does not advance cosmic discovery, which is what, at least in astrophysics, is our goal.
Yeah.
So however legitimate that set of reasoning, that those statements you made, however philosophically legitimate they are, they have no value to us in science.
Yeah, but this wasn't a cosmological or astrophysical question, right? So this is a different discipline. So I agree. So this is about metaphysics or philosophy of language. What's the meaning? So how can we manage to talk about things, and then how can they determine the truth of our sentences, things like that. And when there is no interaction because of the 8 minute and 20 second, departure there, but still it can affect this. Still, this.
Well, I would say 99.99%. No. 99% of the time you say there's a solar flare in the sun, you'll be wrong. So I would look at the one time that you're right as a statistical luck in that one time and not give any meaning to it at all.
Sure.
That's how I would view it.
Yeah, but what I'm thinking is, yes, I don't know. I don't know if it is true or not. It was just statistical. It can be true. It can be false. But if it is true, it is made true by the solar flare. How? That's my question, right? So
yeah, and I'm saying this is you. And while you're thinking that, I have teams of scientists inventing and designing satellites and engineers participating, and we're studying how the sun wave and the sun. It's called solar. It's called solar weather, by the way. When you have the solar wind, we call it weather. It's very affectionate of us, I think, to think of what the sun does as weather in the solar system. But so we'll do all the rest of that, and we'll continue to make discoveries about how objects function in the solar system, and you will not.
Yes.
You will be probing language and maybe there's a philosophy of knowledge or information. I don't know, but that's not useful to us. And like I said, that's why that question is not right alongside us, our solar scientist, because it's not there.
I agree.
Yeah, so I would say go back to the brain people and put a question there, all right? How about the fact that we act on information that is in our brain before it reaches our conscious brain. Take that same brain power. It's all about the brain. Take the same philosophical brain energy you're investing in whether it is true that a flare went up and it makes your sentence true. Put that in our brain. Go to the neuroscience labs and find out how is it that we can do things. This brings up free will, right?
Yeah.
Do we actually have conscious free will if we do things and only after the fact justify it? What's going on there? And what does that mean? What are the consequences to that of legal systems, of the causes and effects of people's behavior in a free society? Oh my gosh! So I would say put that line of reasoning elsewhere because it's not helping us in astrophysics.
Also, I don't think it is supposed to be
okay. Okay.
The whole philosophical, yeah. So you are doing
if it's not supposed to, I have no complaint. Okay.
Yeah.
But you can't then require that I address this and spend much of my own brain power trying to help you figure that out.
So my what I'm thinking here is there's also understanding, right? So the philosopher asks this. So here's my definition of philosophy, by the way. Not all philosophers agree with this, but in my definition of philosophy, sometimes we ask so deep questions that unfortunately empirical methods cannot help us answering. Then we would still want to be rational about it, and we want to answer that question, at least work on the question rationally, and we end up doing philosophy. And one question is that I'm asking is, I use language and I talk about things. How can I manage? How can I manage talking about things? How do the reality make some sentences true, some sentences false? This is about understanding something very fundamental about us, right? Language, how does it work?
This is why we invented mathematics, which has logical consistencies and inconsistencies that can be seen by anyone who reads it, no matter your culture. And so it's not about how tricked out your language is to be able to communicate what is or is not true, or the nuances of what is or is not true. So we invoke language minimally in the moving frontier of the physical sciences. We'd much rather put symbols behind it and demonstrate the logical patterns. And by the way, if I have an idea about how the universe works, at the risk of stating the obvious, certainly to your audience, if I have an idea, a new physical idea, I want to attach mathematical symbols to it so that I can manipulate the symbols and not be distracted by what a word means in my attempt to try to describe it. And so now I can manipulate the symbols logically, perfectly logically, and then have a prediction. Now I can test the prediction. Is it true? Hey, it's true. So maybe my mathematical model is probing the actual machinery of the universe that I'm intending to understand. So if you're going to say, let me solve problems using language alone, to paraphrase what you just said, I think, I would say no. Make a mathematical model, image of the language you're trying to communicate, and then you don't have to worry about how one person's understanding or usage of a word differs from that of anybody else.
Well, I'm not sure actually that is what philosophers are doing. So for example, there were some fine-tuning argument, for example, right? You also talked about this in the past about the fine-tuning argument. So is the fine-tuning of the universe, does it constitute evidence for the existence of God? Things like that. Or problem of evil, for example.
Or designer, because there are thousands of gods people have worshipped.
Yeah, like a divine kind of design kind of thing. But there are some actually. So there's some progress. So in the problem of evil case, for example, first the argument was there's a logical inconsistency between the existence of God and the existence of evil, and then Plantinga proved actually that there is no logical inconsistency. Now the argument evolved, the discussion evolved. Now it is more about existence of evil being evidence for non-existence of God, for example. So there is some progress, negative progress.
So I'm saying, yes, so that's religious philosophy, okay? I don't have a problem with that. But the moment you want to tell me about a flare on the sun, we're not in the same room together.
Yeah. So I wasn't talking about the flare on the sun, actually. So it was about the sentence and what makes it true. So that was the question. That was just an example. Or I can give any other example, actually. But I think I can see where we disagree, right? So
I don't. Where do we disagree?
I think so. In philosophy, what I'm doing in philosophy is not trying to discover new empirical realities, new empirical findings, right? Which can only be discovered by observation.
Yeah, and I don't believe I made that claim. What I said was philosophy and science, the physical sciences at their best, we're both together there, and you're helping me think about a problem, helping me pose a question, and then I then figure out an experiment to test that question. Because I might not see what you do, and then come up with an excellent question to probe. So that your value to me is right at that cusp, not, oh, what have you discovered lately? No, that's not, I don't expect that of philosophers. Philosophers shape, as I understand it, shape how people see and think about the world. That's
like meaning, I don't
but at its best, as most influential, I should say, it accomplishes that.
Yeah. Okay. So it is more about the conceptual, as Massimo Pigliucci said. It is not about the empirical space what the philosophers are working on. This is more about the conceptual space, right?
Conceptual space, by all means.
Yeah.
And that conceptual space has been out of reach of philosophers in the physical sciences, beginning with relativity and quantum physics.
Okay. I can.
And then we probe the atom and the particles inside the atom. You know, we discovered quarks. Would you have said, I think the atom should have quarks? Go check that out. No, you're not thinking that. It's not there.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't expect it to be.
Yeah. So actually, we are out of time, but the simulation hypothesis.
Well, let's slip that in real quick. So did you have a specific question of me about it?
Yeah, actually, so I wanted to say, so the simulation, can you tell us very quickly what simulation hypothesis is, if you want?
Yeah, sure. I think many people trace it to Nick Bostrom, who, did I say his last name right? Bostrom, yeah. A philosopher at Oxford. He posed the very, very straightforward question. You notice in modern day we have computing power, and we can create simulations in a computer of other worlds. All right. For a while there, one of the oldest of these is Sim City, simulated city. So you create a city, it has residents, you're mayor of the city, you make decisions, this sort of thing. That was kind of fun. Then they had Sim Life and Sim other things. That the whole Sim brand expanded. And then you have video games where you're characters in the video game. All right. So he posed the question, might there be a day where computing power is sufficiently strong, sufficiently fast, that you can precisely simulate a world, right on down to characters that have their own thoughts that they believe are the product of free will. If that's the case, then what is the difference between we who created them and them? If we are saying to ourselves, we believe we have free thought, and I'm moving my arms. And so you do that, and then you say, that simulation, if they have scientists and engineers, and they'll invent computing, and they'll invent simulations, and they might find it interesting to simulate their world. And so you do this all the way down, turtles all the way down, as you say. So if you could have 1,000 simulations, and the one original civilization that created the first simulation, but you have 1,000 others. Now you close your eyes and throw a dart. What are the chances of that dart hitting the real world? It's 1 in 1,000, and all the rest are going to be simulations. So using that reasoning alone, and I'm simplifying some things here, but that's the basic point. Using that reasoning alone, chances are we're in a simulation. All right, because the dart is going to hit 999 out of 1,000 times. It's going to hit a simulation, and if we're drawn randomly from the universe of of worlds, most of those worlds are simulated. Yeah, and so this brings great discomfort to people. Of course, why wouldn't it? But reading more on it, I think I found a good rebuttal to it. It's that. We, right now, don't have the power to create another simulation. Okay, that's a perfect simulation. So that means we can't be 998 of those worlds, because 998 of those worlds had the power to create a simulation of themselves. What does that leave behind? That leaves the very last one that got created that hasn't evolved yet to be able to create one. And it leaves the first one, which might not have had the power to create the first simulation in the first place.
Yeah.
So we go from 1 in 1,000 in this example to we go from 999 out of 1,000 to 2 out of 1,000. Okay?
Okay.
Did I invert that correctly? But you see what my point is? The point is we can only be drawn from either the first one that's attempting to make a simulation for the first time, or the last one that's not evolved to make one yet.
Yeah,
we can't be any of the ones in the middle because they already know how to make a perfect simulation, and we don't.
All right. So
the sample size from which we are drawn drops from 1,000 to 2.
Yeah, then 0.5 then the probability that we are in the simulation is 0.5, right?
Correct. Rather than 0.99.
Okay.
9.
All right. So Richard Gott.
Right? So I like that, and I'm sticking with it.
Okay. All right. I have one thing though about this. I will be very quick. Another problem I think I have with the simulation hypothesis, and it is this. So, for example, when you simulate, let's say we simulate very powerful magnets, right, on the computer, very powerful magnets. Okay, their behavior and all that. But the magnets, the simulation of the magnets, they don't really generate magnetic field, right? The simulation itself, like the magnets, or so two objects colliding and then creating sound waves in the air. We simulate them, but there is no sound really. And when we simulate the brain, right, how the brain works, we can simulate actually physical, the chemical, the electrochemical, all the functionings and everything of the brain. But there is no actually mass or the of the brain. There's no physical substrate of the brain that we are creating in the simulation. We are just simulating it. So why think that if you simulate colliding things, you do not think that you are actually generating sound when you don't think that? Why do you think that we can actually generate mental properties, actual genuine selves, for example?
I don't know why you have a problem with that, because if I make a simulation, I set up the rules of engagement of that simulation.
Yes.
Right? If you ever played Mario, okay, everybody knows Mario. Mario jumps, okay, and he can. I played Mario Galaxy, right? Of course, I would Mario Galaxy, and he's there. He can walk on the walls, and there's places where there's no gravity. These are rules that the programmer sets up.
Yes.
And does Mario know Mario is in a video game? This is the question. Let's leave it for you guys to think about. If the person does not know they are in a simulation, that counts as a perfect simulation because it's a simulation. And if they make a sound, I have a set of rules in my programming that says at Mach 1, someone at this distance is going to hear that sound delayed, and what will they hear? Well, let's create the sound of these two things. If it's a metal, if it's a bell, is it rocks? So I don't have to be in between. I just have to time it right so that my rules are consistent with the universe I created. And so you're saying we're talking about a material world as a thing of meaningful substance, and I'm talking about a simulated world where everything you experience is real in the sense that I simulated it to be real in your head, just like in the movie series The Matrix.
Yeah, but the Matrix, in the Matrix, they had brains, right? So they were in simulation. The world was simulation, but the simulation was played in the brain, right?
Yeah, but they're creating neurosynaptic phenomena in the brain that they think is real that is not actually happening. Yeah, that's the only point I'm making.
Okay, so so this is the last thing I will say. John Searle's example I want to give. So he says, for example, we simulate a thunderstorm, right, in the computer, like weather forecast, but there is no actual wetness. We do not really create actual wetness in that.
So what you do, you create the wetness where someone would have experienced it. So no need to create the entire world at all times. You just create the world experienced by the actors in that, well, not actors, the characters in that world. So as I turn my head, this part of the world is getting simulated. If I dig into the ground, and because there's no earth, right? There's no earth. I have a surface here. If I start digging, I think there's an earth. So quickly, the computer will have dirt come out of this hole. Oh, and then I'll get to the mantle, and I'll get to the and so what people experience is the reality. And if that is a sufficiently detailed reality, you'll not be able to tell the difference in the same way the characters in the Matrix. Only the superior hackers knew there was something a little bit wrong with the Matrix. Everybody else is just fine with it. And they're living out their lives, going to work every day, paying their rent, and taking out the garbage. Okay, which is one of the lines in the movie. So, you want to say wet. The wet has to be experienced, then that's programmable in.
So, okay. I'm not sure. So this is computational.
Oh, by the way, the leaf is wet under the thunderstorm? I don't have to simulate that because I'm only simulating the people in the game. The lion doesn't have to be real. Okay? I'm simulating the lion. But you will think this is all real. And when the lion comes and bites you, I will have blood spurt out because the program said so.
So this though, this presumes, I think, computationalism, that consciousness is computation. Just computation. That I'm not sure
That's
about
scary.
that.
Okay. And my good friend up at MIT, Max Tegmark, wrote a whole book on this. And what he said was, if a video game is all math, basically they're calculations, and if you can simulate it perfectly, that means everything in our world is mathematical, right? And if that's the case, he can't. That means everything is math, everything, and that's a scary prospect. I don't think a good argument against it exists.
Against everything being computational.
Exactly. Against everything, your thoughts, your actions, your decisions.
I really don't want
whether something feels wet, because that has to do with the surface tension. Mercury, liquid mercury, no one does this now because we know it's bad for you. I'm old enough to remember we played with mercury as children. You can dip your hand in mercury and come out, and there's no mercury on your hand. And so we don't call that wet, even though mercury is a liquid. Right? So you simulate this. You simulate this. And if it sticks to your hand, like an oil, or that's wet. All right? And you'll think in your head that's wet because it got programmed that way.
Okay. So it is maybe 2 more minutes. I don't want to take much
2 more minutes, yes.
Okay. So then last thing I will say about this, why I don't think computationalism is correct, right? So why I think that we cannot really reduce our mental phenomena, right? The conscious feelings to computation. So here's an example. Bees can see ultraviolet colors, right?
Okay. Most insects can,
All right. So then let's say, but
that's why bug zappers work, because you attract them to an ultraviolet light. And they, okay, but go on.
All right. So then let's say, I don't know if we know how it works, but let's say we figured that out, right? So their brain and their nervous system and their eyes and everything. And then we just, come up with a way of giving that ability to a human being by neuroscience, by neurosurgery and all that. Okay. And we do that. Now this person sees like a normal person plus ultraviolet colors. So then when this person looks at the rainbow, there's an 8th color there, right? Ultraviolet one. Now, I can look at this person's brain, and I can, in principle, of course, in ideal situation, I can really figure out how the brain is working, right? So, because we actually, through surgery, we did that. How the functioning, the physics, and everything. However, there is something I don't know about the brain that perceives consciously an ultraviolet color, namely, what it is like for the person, right? How does it look like? What does it look like, the color? There is something about that mental state that I don't know. However, I know everything about the brain. Therefore, there is something more than the physical. There is more than something, not physical, sorry, but the computational, functional part of the brain. It might be biological.
Perception on some level, right? You can say, yes, that person sees the UV, but we don't get to see through their own eyes.
Yes. Yeah.
And however, if you look at the biochemistry and the biophysics of the lens of the eye, the vitreous humor, if that is the same for everybody, you're not given a reason to think that that person's experience will be fundamentally different from anybody else's if the biochemistry is otherwise identical. So most of us have all three pigment sensors in our cones, in our eyes, right? So it's basically RGB, and it's there. And some people are missing one of those, and so we could say they're colorblind. So we do have a sense of what they see because we can give them tests, and they don't see the letter in mid the circles. Okay, they're blue-green colorblind, or they're red-yellow, red-green colorblind. So we do have some sense of this. And what's a little freakier to me is if you put someone on an LSD trip, not everyone experiences exactly the same thing. So that's interesting to me.
Okay.
And that's a very perceptive thing because they're getting signals that are not coming from reality, external reality. And so, but I'm not going to sell neuroscience short the way you just did. I'm going to say, just because you don't know it now doesn't mean somebody's not going to figure out a way to. Now, there's the ethics of this, right? Putting probes in all of the neurosynaptic centers, and you watch things get activated, and you watch what the person says, and you listen to what they feel, and you make a map of the brain that gives you a full understanding of where the perception is, what leads to their statements about what it is they do see, and how that can actually go awry. Because as you know, our sensory system is very susceptible to bias and bigotry and all the rest of this. So what I'll do is I'll leave you with a quote, which I've stayed with me my whole life when I first learned of it. It's by Claudius Ptolemy. He wrote a book, Almagest, which at the time was a brilliant work. It was wrong, but it was a brilliant work of the geocentric universe with Earth in the middle. And there he is trying to understand the operations of nature. And he hand wrote in his manuscript, "When I trace at my pleasure the windings to and fro of the heavenly bodies, I no longer touch earth with my feet. I stand in the presence of Zeus himself and take my fill of ambrosia." And I thought to myself, here he is, one of the most brilliant people in his day. He's looking up, he's admitting he doesn't understand it. And in fact, only the gods understand it. All right? They have immortal brains, and we are mere corporeal, mortal sacks of flesh. And so hearing that, and it would take 1,000 years, 1,700 years, for Isaac Newton to come up and say, here's an equation. Wait, Copernicus to put the sun back in the middle, and then Newton say, here's an equation. We got this. No longer do you have to bask in the presence of the gods. You can bask in the presence of this formula and give you the insights that you previously thought only gods had. So when people say we will never be able to measure love or how beautiful a painting is, I say, no, I don't agree. The day will come where we'll put sensors in everybody's head and we'll know when you experience love by looking at something and say, that's the love center. There it is.
Yeah.
Now I put a really ugly painting in front of you and I stimulate that sensor. You say, wow, I love this painting. Then you'll know you have the causes and effects of these things that people don't want to believe would ultimately succumb to the investigations of empirical science. So I will never get caught saying, we'll never be able to measure this. I'm not going to do that.
Okay, because that was my point actually, right? So we cannot measure how it looks to him, the ultraviolet color, right? We cannot really measure, we cannot quantify. There is something about our mental states that we cannot quantify, but everything about the brain we can quantify, or the computation we can quantify.
What I don't have a good answer for is, can the brain fully understand itself?
Yeah, that's another good question.
We need an external, a bigger brain to come say, here's your problem, and fix that.
Yeah. I think at one point you talk about how chimpanzees and us, we have a very little, difference. And that what if
Very little difference in the DNA. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What if something that is more, advanced than us, for example, how would they actually see the?
They would see all of our most brilliant work as trivial.
Yeah, for example.
Likely, yes.
Okay, so my example was based on Frank Jackson's knowledge argument. If the people who are watching us right now, if they are wondering what I was talking about, so they can look at Frank Jackson's knowledge argument about the.
Yes, and I hope they watch this more than going back to the Nerdist commentary.
I think we did a good job. I think we clarified some stuff.
Yes, good. Thank you. Thank
you for coming and talking and sharing all this.
And delighted. And stay safe against COVID. We're all still fighting this.
Yeah, you too.
It's a common enemy to all humans.
Yes.
And we're not really behaving that way about it.
Yeah.
And for me, it's a dry run. It's a practice run for when the aliens come. And they want to attack all humans. Are we together or are we apart?
Yeah, that's another issue. No, we cannot go to alien.
Well, delighted to chat with you. And
you too.
And if this serves your students and whatever, I enjoyed this conversation. And thanks for giving me the chance to say my piece.
Of course. Thank you very much for coming. And thank you once again. And I thank all the people who are watching us right now. And have a good day.